She was 27 years old, 1,000 miles from everything she had ever known, and for the first time since her husband's funeral, did not want to stand back up. Not because she couldn't, her hands still worked, her lungs still pulled air. But there on her knees in the red dirt of New Mexico territory, with the August sun bearing down like judgment, Violet Mercer thought maybe this is enough. Maybe this is where it ends. She had survived burying her husband. She had survived the whispers at his funeral, the cold silence of his family, the slow erasure of everything she had built in Charleston. She had survived boarding a westbound train with 2 bags and $17 and a letter from a doctor she had never met who simply said, "Please come quickly. We need you." She had survived all of that, but the desert had been waiting, and the desert did not care about survival. Violet's medical bag hit the dirt beside her hands open. She didn't have the strength to hold on anymore. She never saw the rider coming. If you want to know what happens next, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel and follow Violet's story and all the way to the end. Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Don't you dare die on my land. A widow nurse fell in desert. A rancher refused to let her go 3 days before she collapsed in the New Mexico dust. Violet Mercer had been sitting in a stagecoach outside of Santa Fe, watching the desert scroll past like a painting of somewhere she had never meant to be. She had the window seat. She had chosen it deliberately not for the view, but because the window gave her somewhere to look when the other passengers tried to speak to her. There were 3 of them, a heavy-set merchant in a bowler hat who smelled of tobacco and self-importance, a young clerk with restless hands who had been stealing glances at her since Albuquerque, and an older woman in lavender who had introduced herself as Mrs. Caldwell and then spent 40 minutes complaining about the condition of Western roads. Violet had said almost nothing since boarding. She was good at that now. She had learned it in Charleston, how to go quiet inside, how to let other people's words wash over her like water over stone, how to be present in a room without being there at all. The young clerk leaned forward. "You got family in Red Rock Flats, ma'am?" "No." "Husband?" Violet turned from the window and looked at him directly. "No, sir." He seemed encouraged rather than discouraged by this. His smile widened. "Well, a young woman traveling alone in this territory." "I'm a nurse," she said. "I have a position waiting. I'm not looking for conversation." The smile faded. He sat back. Mrs. Caldwell gave Violet a look that managed to be both disapproving and sympathetic, the particular expression of a woman who had learned to judge other women for the survival strategies that she herself used. Violet turned back to the window. The desert was beautiful in its way. She had not expected that. She had grown up on the Carolina coast where beauty was green and wet and salt-tinged, where the air sat heavy on your shoulders and everything grew in wild profusion. This landscape was nothing like that. It was all reduction stripped down to bone and light and color. Red rock, ochre sand, blue sky so vast it made you feel the specific smallness of yourself. Saguaro cactus standing in the distance like sentinels, dust devils spinning and dissolving. It felt like a place where the past couldn't follow you. She had been wrong about that. The past had very good horses. Violet had come west because of a letter from Dr. August Reeves of Red Rock Flats, New Mexico territory, who had answered her inquiry through a medical placement service with unusual directness. "Miss Mercer, I am 71 years old and tired. The mind brings me a broken man every other day, and children who need vaccinating, and women in difficult labor, and I cannot continue alone. I will provide room, board, and a fair wage. I need someone trained and willing to work hard. If that is you, please come quickly." She had read that letter 6 times. Please come quickly. Someone wanted her skills, not her family name. Her father had died of drink when she was 14, leaving no name worth wanting. Not her social connections, those had evaporated along with everything else after Thomas died. Just her, Violet Mercer. The woman who had spent 3 years nursing patients in the charity ward of the Charleston City Hospital before meeting Thomas, before marrying him, before watching him die of typhoid fever, while she held his hand and begged God for a miracle that never arrived. The stagecoach lurched. A sound like a gunshot cracked from beneath the coach, sharp, immediate, final. The driver's curse floated down from the box. The vehicle swayed and then ground to a halt, tilting slightly to the left as one of the horses let out a high, frightened sound. "Wheel spoke," the driver announced, appearing at the door a moment later. His face was sun-leathered to the color of saddle leather, and his expression suggested this was Tuesday. Bad break. One of the rear wheel spokes snapped clean. We ain't going nowhere for a while. How long the merchant demanded? Few hours if I'm lucky, longer if I'm not. I can try to patch it, but this road ain't exactly stocked with wheelwrights. Violet looked out the window. The sun was directly overhead. They were an open desert, not a building visible in any direction, the road a pale scratch across a sea of red and brown. Red Rock Flats is still about 12 miles out, the driver added. Anyone wants to walk, there's a ranch about 3 miles northeast. Iron Hollow. They might have a wagon to spare, or at least a place to wait out of the sun. 3 miles. Violet did the calculation quickly. 3 miles to the ranch, possibly a ride to Red Rock Flats from there. She would arrive hours late rather than a full day late. Dr. Reeves had written, "Please come quickly." That still meant something. She picked up her medical bag. The clerk looked at her. "You're not actually thinking about walking. 3 miles isn't far. It's 100 degrees. Then I'd better move quickly." She pulled her other bag down from the overhead rack and stood up. Which direction northeast, the driver told her. He also looked her up and down her city-made boots, her pale complexion, the fine lawn of her dress that was absolutely wrong for this climate, and his expression shifted into something that was not quite pity and not quite admiration. "Follow the wheel ruts," he said. "There's a sign for Iron Hollow about a mile in. You can't miss it." "Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated. "Don't rest too long in one place. Shade makes you think you can afford more time than you got." She thanked him again. She set out. The first mile was manageable. Violet kept her pace steady and deliberate, the way she had learned to move through hospital corridors on 14-hour shifts, not fast, not slow, conserving energy. She wrapped her shawl over her bonnet for extra insulation against the sun. She drank sparingly from her canteen rationing with the calculation of someone who understood dehydration from the clinical side. The landscape was stark and enormous around her. Wind moved through the scrub grass in long waves. A hawk turned slow circles overhead, riding thermals she couldn't feel. The wheel ruts she followed were old and deep, pressed into the earth by years of wagon traffic, and she kept her eyes on them and thought about her new position and the patients waiting for her and the work she had come all this way to do. She did not let herself think about Thomas. She was getting better at that. 17 months since the funeral, and the gaps between the moments of ambush were growing longer. There had been a time when anything could trigger it, the wrong song, the smell of the fever ward, a man laughing in a particular register that sounded too much like him. Now it was usually just the quiet that got her. The long quiet of being alone at night with no one to say her name, the way he had said it, like it meant something, like she mattered. Vi, he used to call her. Not Violet. Va. Nobody called her that anymore. She pushed the thought away and kept walking. The second mile showed its teeth. The heat, which had been an abstract discomfort in the first mile, became something specific and aggressive. It pressed down from above and radiated up from the earth simultaneously, catching her between two burning surfaces. Sweat soaked through her dress and dried almost immediately, leaving a faint white residue of salt on the fabric. Her medical bag, which contained instruments and bandages and 3 bottles of medicine, grew heavier with each step in the particular way of things that cannot grow heavier, but seem to anyway. She stopped in the thin shadow of a large rock and drank carefully from her canteen. "You can do this," she told herself. The words came out flat and unconvincing. She said them again anyway. "You've done harder things." She had held Thomas while he died. She had stood at his graveside while his mother refused to look at her. She had packed her entire life into 2 bags in the middle of the night because the alternative was continuing to breathe the same air as a woman who had decided that Violet was responsible for her son's death. 3 miles was nothing. She stood, adjusted her bags, and kept walking. The third mile broke her. Not dramatically, not with any declaration. Just quietly, gradually, the way a lamp runs out of oil, not going dark all at once, just slowly dimming step by step until there isn't anything left. Her vision began to blur at the edges. Her thoughts, which she had kept disciplined and forward-facing for the entire walk, began to scatter. She was thinking about Thomas, about the night before he got sick, when he had brought her flowers for no reason, just because it's Tuesday. Vi does, there need to be a reason. And then she was thinking about the baby they had lost 6 weeks before the typhoid. The one she had never told anyone about, the one she had mourned entirely alone because Thomas was already sick and she couldn't add one more grief to the pile he was carrying. She was the only person in the world who remembered that small life. That thought hit her like a physical blow there in the middle of the desert, and her legs simply stopped obeying her. She saw the water trough before she fell. It was perhaps 100 yards ahead, a long wooden structure set beside a fence line, clearly the outer edge of a working ranch. Beyond it, in the shimmering heat distance, she could make out a roof line, a sign she couldn't read from this distance. She started toward it. 40 yards. Her medical bag slipped from her fingers. She bent to retrieve it and discovered that bending required more resources than she currently had. She straightened without the bag, took 2 more steps. 30 yards. Her knees hit the earth. The ground was hard and hot. She did not register pain so much as a sudden ceasing of effort, as if her body had simply decided that this was far enough that whatever came next could come without her assistance. She looked at the water trough. She could see it clearly now. The wood was gray and weathered, and the water inside caught the light in small liquid pieces. Get up, she told herself. She didn't. And the part of her that noticed she wasn't getting up, that part, which she had been working very hard not to examine for the past 17 months, that part thought, now maybe this is where it ends. Maybe this is enough. It was not surrender so much as exhaustion of the will to keep fighting something she wasn't sure she wanted to win. She didn't see the rider coming. She didn't hear him either, not until the sound of hooves was close and getting closer, and by then her vision had contracted to a narrow point, and she was thinking with the strange clarity that sometimes arrives at the end of things, Thomas. I'm sorry, I tried. Elias Calloway had been in a bad mood since sunrise, which was not unusual, and for good reason, which was also not unusual. The telegram had arrived the evening before, and he had been carrying it in his shirt pocket like a coal since then, not because he needed to reread it, but because he could not seem to make himself throw it away. Final offer, Mr. Calloway. $1,200 for full subsurface water rights to Iron Hollow property, except by September 1st or face legal challenge. Arthur Crane Mining Company, $1,200. His grandfather had dug the primary well at Iron Hollow with his own hands in 1841. The water table that Crane wanted to buy had been running through Calloway land for 40 years, through his grandfather's time and his father's time, and now his time sustaining 400 head of cattle and the livelihoods of 11 ranch hands and their families. That water was not simply property. It was the reason Iron Hollow existed at all. And Arthur Crane, who had arrived in New Mexico territory 6 years ago, with Eastern money and Eastern methods, had spent those 6 years quietly acquiring water rights from every rancher he could pressure or purchase, channeling water toward his mine operations and away from the land that depended on it. 3 smaller ranches in the valley had sold out in the past 2 years. A fourth had simply dried up and the owners had walked away. Elias was not going to walk away, but he also was not naive enough to think that refusing was the end of it. Crane's men had already fenced off access to a secondary creek that ran through the eastern pasture. 2 of his fences had been cut in the past month, and last week Abe, his foreman, had found boot prints near the main wellhead that didn't belong to any of the ranch hands. He was moving a small group of cattle to the northern pasture when his hand Tomas Young, dark-eyed, sharp as a hawk, pulled up beside him. "Boss, what? There's something by the west trough." Tomas's voice had that careful, deliberate flatness that meant he was choosing his words. "I thought at first it was a dog. Then I thought maybe a coyote." Elias looked at him. "But I think it's a person." He was already spurring his horse before the sentence finished. What he found was not what he expected. He had been prepared for trouble, one of Crane's men, maybe sent to do something to the water supply. He had been prepared for ugliness. He had not been prepared for a woman crumpled in the dirt 30 feet from the trough, her dark hair loose from its pins, her face the color of a bad sunset, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid movements that a man did not need a medical education to recognize as alarming. He was off his horse before the animal fully stopped. "Ma'am," he knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. He touched her forehead and pulled his hand back. She was burning not the ordinary warmth of exertion, but something deeper and more serious, the kind of heat that meant the body had lost the argument with the environment. Scattered in the dirt around her, a medical bag, its clasp open a few instruments and a roll of bandage half fallen out. A larger carpet bag, several feet back, dropped or fallen some distance ago. City-made boots entirely wrong for this terrain. A dress of fine cotton that was soaked through with dried sweat. Elias had no idea who she was or what she was doing on his land or how she had come to be there. None of that mattered right now. Tomas, he didn't look up. Ride to the house. Tell Carmen to prepare the guest room and get cold water, a lot of it. Tell her now. He heard Tomas take off at a gallop. He gathered the woman's bags in one hand and then lifted her carefully, one arm beneath her knees, the other behind her back. She weighed almost nothing. That was wrong. A woman her age, her build, should not feel so insubstantial in his arms. It told him she had not been eating well or had been pushing herself past the point where the body had reserves to draw on. Hold on, he said, though she couldn't hear him. He carried her half a mile to the house without stopping. Carmen met him at the door. Carmen had been running the Iron Hollow household since before Elias's father died, and in the 8 years since she had become the kind of steady presence that a ranch or a man could organize itself around without quite realizing it was happening. She was in her 40s, small and quick-moving, and she took one look at the woman in Elias's arms and her face went through 3 expressions in a second and a half: alarm, assessment, and decisive action. Guest room, I've got the water. Go. Elias laid the woman on the bed. Carmen was already there with cold cloths, efficient and unhurried, pressing them to the woman's forehead and wrists with the competence of someone who had dealt with heat emergencies before. The ranch hands got into trouble in summer. It happened, her bag, Carmen said. The small one. Medical bag. She might have something in it. Elias retrieved it. Carmen went through it with quick hands, instruments, bandages, medicines, carefully labeled in small, neat handwriting. Laudanum, carbolic acid, quinine. She's a nurse, Carmen said, or a doctor. A nurse. Look at the instruments. These are nursing instruments, not surgical. She set the bag aside. She's going to be all right. She got here in time. A pause. You got here in time. Elias stood back and let Carmen work. He had been in this room before, though not for years. It had been his sister's room once, Lizzie, who had followed him around the ranch from the time she could walk, asking questions about everything, making friends with every animal, driving him to distraction and delight in equal measure. Lizzie, who had left Iron Hollow at 18 to marry a homesteader named William, who had gone to build something of her own 50 miles away, who had died in childbed at 23, with no doctor and no midwife, and no one who knew what to do. He had not been in this room since the year after her funeral. He looked at the woman on the bed. She was perhaps 27, 28. Dark hair, a face that was even now, even in its current state of distress, structured with a kind of quiet intelligence. The flush of heat sickness had begun to fade slightly as Carmen worked. He didn't stay. There was no reason to stay. Carmen had it handled. He sat outside on the porch instead in the old wooden chair his father had made and watched the sun move across the sky and told himself he was just waiting to make sure the woman was all right. That was all, just making sure she didn't die on his property. He waited there for 4 hours. She woke at dusk. Carmen came to tell him. He went in. The woman was sitting up in the bed or attempting to sit up against Carmen's protests. She had that particular expression that Elias had come to associate with people who refused to acknowledge their own limitations, jaw set, eyes clear, ignoring the evidence of their own bodies. She had recovered enough to be stubborn. That was a good sign. Mr. Calloway, she said his name before he could introduce himself. Carmen must have told her. Her voice was steady, but had a quality of deliberate controls to it, the kind of careful steadiness that required effort to maintain. I understand you saved my life. I found you, he said. Carmen saved your life. He carried you half a mile, Carmen said from the doorway. He wouldn't let Tomas do it. And he sat outside your door for 4 hours, making sure you were still breathing. But yes, nothing heroic. Elias looked at Carmen with an expression that she met and held without flinching. I'm Violet Mercer. The woman extended a hand that was barely steady. He shook it because it would have been rude not to. I'm supposed to be Dr. Reeves's new nurse in Red Rock Flats. I was on the stage when the wheel broke. The driver said 3 miles. It's 3.5, Elias said. In August. I'm aware that was a miscalculation. It almost killed you. It didn't. They looked at each other across the room. He was trying to assess her and she was allowing him to, and not allowing him to simultaneously the particular combination of transparency and guard that people developed when they had been too frequently misread. "You need to rest," he said. "Tomorrow morning, if you can stand without falling, I'll take you to Red Rock Flats myself. I can't impose. You already have." The words were not unkind despite their bluntness. Might as well finish it. She seemed to want to argue. She didn't have the resources for it. He watched her decision happen, the slight shift of her shoulders, the fractional relaxation around her eyes. "Thank you," she said, and meant it without performance. He nodded and left. Carmen caught up with him in the hallway. "She's going to be fine," Carmen said quietly. "She's stronger than she looks." "Most people are." "I mean it." Carmen's voice had that particular weight it got when she was saying something she had thought about. There's something in her eyes, like she's been carrying something too heavy for too long and she doesn't know how to set it down. Elias said nothing. "You know what that looks like," Carmen added. He kept walking down the hall. "Ma'am." He didn't sleep well that night, not because of Violet Mercer, or not only because of her. The telegram from Arthur Crane sat on his desk where he had placed it before dinner, still folded into its original sharp quarters, its creases precise as a thread. He sat at the desk for an hour after the house went quiet, looking at it, thinking through the situation from every angle he could find. The law was on his side. His grandfather had filed the water rights with the territorial court in 1843. Those filings were on record. Any challenge Crane brought would have to contend with 40 years of documented ownership. The law was on his side, but that did not mean much in a territory where Arthur Crane had purchased influence as systematically as he had purchased water. The territorial judge in Red Rock Flats, a man named Holt, had ruled in Crane's favor in two prior disputes with smaller ranchers. There were rumors that Crane had funded Holt's campaign for the position. There were rumors about a lot of things involving Arthur Crane, and most of the rumors had a way of being true and unprovable simultaneously. 3 months ago, Elias had retained an attorney in Santa Fe, a man named Gordon with a good reputation and a solid record on property cases. He had sent Gordon all the relevant documentation. Gordon had written back twice with encouraging assessments. Last month, Gordon had sent a terse letter saying he had a conflict of interest and could no longer represent Elias's case. He had not said what the conflict was. Elias had a good idea. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. He had contacts in Albuquerque, an old friend from his cavalry days who had become a lawyer himself. It was a long shot, but he was running out of short ones. He wrote until midnight, folded the letter, addressed it. Then he went to stand outside in the dark for a while, the way he did when his thoughts would not quiet down, looking out over the land his grandfather had claimed and his father had built and he had spent 20 years defending. The night was enormous out here. Stars from edge to edge, no city light to diminish them. The smell of creosote after the day's heat. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once and went silent. From the guest room window, Lizzie's old room, a faint light still showed. The nurse was still awake. He stood there longer than he meant to. In the morning, Violet could stand without falling. It took a moment. She rose from the bed and the room tilted briefly like a boat catching a wave. But she found her footing and held it. She dressed in the clean clothes that Carmen had somehow acquired, a simple cotton dress in dark blue that fit well enough and was infinitely more practical than the ruined one she had arrived in. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She was thinner than she had been a year ago. She had not been eating consistently since leaving Charleston, not from lack of appetite exactly, but from lack of remembering to eat, from the absence of anyone who would notice if she didn't. She had her mother's cheekbones, her father's dark eyes, and a mouth that people sometimes described as serious and sometimes as sad, and she had decided a long time ago that she could not control what her face communicated when she wasn't actively managing it. She went downstairs. Carmen was in the kitchen and had a plate waiting without being asked. Eggs, bread, something spiced and warm in a clay bowl. "Eat," Carmen said. It was not a request. Violet ate. The food was the best thing she had tasted in months, which was not an exaggeration. Elias appeared while she was finishing. He had been out since dawn. She could tell from the dust on his boots, the slight dampness of his hatband. He moved through the kitchen with the economy of a man who had never had to think about whether he belonged somewhere. This was his house. Every angle of his body said so. He poured coffee and sat down across from her without ceremony. "How do you feel? Better?" She paused, genuinely better. The headache is gone. My hands are steady. You hungry I was. She gestured at the empty plate. Something almost like approval moved through his expression. He drank his coffee in silence for a moment. I'll hitch the wagon after I check the north fence. Hour, maybe two. I can wait. She hesitated. Mr. Calloway, I know I'm an imposition. I'd like to at least be a useful one. Is there anything I can do while I wait? I saw your hand, Tomas, favoring his right wrist this morning. I noticed the way he moved when he was bringing water. Elias set down his cup. He looked at her for a moment with the particular focus of someone taking a genuine assessment. Old injury, he said, 3 years ago, fence wire. It bothers him in the mornings. The way he holds it suggests scar tissue contracting overnight. It's common with improperly healed lacerations. I could wrap it in a way that would help. It won't fix the underlying issue, but it would reduce the morning stiffness. Another pause. I'll send him to you, Elias said. He stood, picked up his hat, and was at the door before he stopped. You should know, Dr. Reeves has been waiting on a nurse for 2 years. Half the town has been waiting with him. A beat. The other half is going to give you trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind that thinks women treating men is indecent. His voice held no emotion about this, as if it were simply terrain to be navigated. There's a woman in town, Dorothea Crane. She considers herself the arbiter of what Red Rock Flats does and doesn't do, Mrs. Arthur Crane, his jaw tightened slightly. Yes, I'll manage, Violet said. He studied her for a moment, something in her face, something in the way she held the words. Then he put his hat on and walked out. Carmen from the counter made no comment, but there was something in the deliberate neutrality of her expression that managed to communicate a great deal anyway. Tomas came to her with his wrist held at the careful angle of someone who had learned to live inside a discomfort rather than ask for help with it. He was young, maybe 22, 23, with the watchful dark eyes of someone who had spent years reading rooms quickly. He sat in the chair she indicated and extended his wrist without being asked a second time. She unwrapped the old cloth he had been using. The scarring was significant, a long diagonal slash that had closed badly puckered at the edges, pulling the surrounding tissue into patterns that would limit range of motion without specific intervention. Someone had cleaned it and closed it, but not well. This was stitched in the field, she said. Not an accusation. An observation. Yes, ma'am. Boss did it himself. No doctor closer than 30 miles. He did a reasonable job given what he was working with. She kept her voice matter-of-fact because that was what he needed, not pity. Not the careful tiptoeing around the subject that made people feel more like their injuries than themselves. The problem is the scar tissue. It contracts in cold and overnight, and it's pulling against your natural movement. Does it hurt most when you first wake up? Yes, ma'am. And when you flex fully? Yes. She began the wrapping, a specific technique that applied counter pressure to the scar tissue without restricting circulation, which she had developed through years of treating workers in the Charleston Charity Ward where similar injuries were common. Does Mr. Calloway know it still bothers you? Tomas was quiet for a moment. I don't complain. I didn't ask if you complain. I asked if he knows. He knows, Tomas said after another pause. He tries not to assign me tasks that aggravate it. I try not to let him see when it does anyway. Violet tied off the wrap and tested the tension. You're going to do this every morning for 2 weeks. I'll write down the technique so you can do it yourself. And I'm going to give you something to rub into the scar tissue at night. It won't fix it, but it will slow the contraction. He flexed his wrist, carefully feeling the difference. His expression shifted in the small, controlled way of someone who was not going to admit how much relief felt like relief. Thank you, Miss Mercer, he said. Violet, he looked at her. My name is Violet, not ma'am. She began writing out the technique in the small, precise hand she used for medical notations. You're going to be seeing me professionally for the next few weeks. We can dispense with the formality. A small smile crossed his young face. Yes, ma'am, Violet. The wagon ride to Red Rock Flats took 3 hours. Elias drove with the same contained silence he brought to everything, his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. Violet sat beside him and discovered that his silence was not uncomfortable. Not the silence of someone refusing to speak, but the silence of someone who had no need to fill space with words. She had grown up around people who filled every silence with noise, as if quiet were something to be afraid of. She found she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be in the presence of another person without the constant performance of conversation. She looked at the desert passing by. "You went to war," she said eventually. It wasn't a question. She had seen the particular economy of movement in veterans, the way they never made themselves large unless they meant to, the way they placed themselves in rooms relative to exits. He glanced at her sidelong. 63 to 65, Union Cavalry. Were you here before born here? My grandfather came out in 1840. My father finished the ranch. I came back after the war and took it over when he died. A pause. I haven't been anywhere else since. Does that ever... She stopped herself. What? She was not sure how to finish the question without it becoming something she didn't mean. Do you ever wish you had gone somewhere else, built something in a different place? He seemed to consider this genuinely. No, he said. I had my reasons for staying. And this place is... He stopped, looked at the landscape around them. It asks a lot of you, but it gives things back too. Different things than it takes, but you don't always know that until later. Violet thought about Charleston, about the house she had shared with Thomas, the small garden he had planted, with the particular optimism of a man who did not know he would be dead before it bloomed. About leaving it, locking the door with hands that shook, taking the key off the ring, and setting it on the kitchen table because she was not coming back, and there was something wrong about keeping it. She had thought leaving would be the hardest part. She had not anticipated that arriving somewhere new and finding it had its own questions would be just as hard. I've never stayed anywhere long enough to know a place like that, she said. He looked at her, not at the road at her, and she felt the particular weight of being genuinely seen by someone who did not seem inclined to pretend otherwise. You might, he said. The town appeared in the distance, a cluster of buildings against the desert, the church steeple, the water tower. Small and solid and real. Red Rock Flats. Dr. Reeves's office is on the main street, Elias said. He's got a sign that's been hanging crooked for as long as I can remember. How long have you known him? He set my arm when I was 12. After that, same as everybody here, he's the only doctor within 30 miles. So you know him whether you want to or not. Almost a smile at the ghost of one passing through his face like light through water. He'll work you harder than you've ever been worked. Fair warning, I didn't come out here to rest. No. The almost smile returned fuller this time. I reckon you didn't. They entered Red Rock Flats. Violet felt the eyes find her almost immediately, the particular quality of attention in a small town where strangers were noteworthy, and a stranger arriving in a rancher's wagon was the kind of event people talked about for weeks. A woman on the boardwalk stopped and stared. Two men near the feed store exchanged looks. They always stare, she murmured, only at things worth staring at. He said it without inflection, but she felt warmth climb her throat anyway. The wagon stopped in front of a low building with a hand-painted sign, A. Reeves, M.D. The sign was in fact hanging at a noticeable angle from the left hook. Elias got down and came around to help her. His hands at her waist were steady and impersonal, the grip of someone helping a person down from a wagon, and nothing more. I'll bring your bags. You don't have to. I'll bring your bags, he said in the tone that apparently ended most conversations. The door opened before they reached it. Dr. August Reeves was exactly as Violet had imagined, from his letter spare and wiry with a shock of white hair and spectacles that had been pushed to his forehead so long they seemed to live there. His eyes behind the spectacles were brilliant and sharp, and taking her measure with the frank efficiency of someone who did not have time to waste. Miss Mercer. His voice was strong. Surprisingly strong for a man who looked like a sustained wind might trouble him. You're a day late. There was a wheel. She nearly died of heat exhaustion, Elias said flatly from behind her. Found her collapsed by the west trough. Reeves's eyebrows climbed. Heat exhaustion. And here you stand looking relatively intact. He considered her. Either you're tougher than you look, young lady, or Elias here is a better nurse than he pretends to be. I just gave her water, Elias said, and a place to sleep. Yes, very modest. Reeves stepped back. Come in, let's see what you're made of. Violet stepped inside. She felt Elias behind her, a warmth of presence, and then its deliberate withdrawal as he set her bags down near the door. You'll be all right here, he said. She turned. He was looking at her directly, the storm cloud eyes steady and certain. I know, she said. Thank you, Mr. Calloway, for everything. He nodded, the particular short nod of a man who was not comfortable with gratitude, but received it honestly when it was meant. Elias, she looked at him. If you're going to thank me properly, he said, use my name. Thank you, she said. Elias. The ghost smiled again. If you need anything, Carmen knows how to reach me. Day or night. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, and Violet stood in the middle of a doctor's cluttered office that smelled of carbolic and old paper, and heard his boots on the boardwalk fading and felt his absence more specifically than she had expected to. Interesting, said Dr. Reeves from somewhere to her left. What is nothing? He waved a hand dismissively. Come, your first patient is waiting. The miner's name was Hector. He was perhaps 25, compact and square-shouldered, with hands like worn leather and a split lip he had clearly had for several days without doing anything about it. He was sitting on the cot in the examination area with the particular stillness of someone who had decided that if he held himself still enough, the pain might not notice him. I'm Violet, she said, pulling back the curtain. I'll be looking at that lip. It's fine, he said. It isn't. She set her bag on the table and snapped it open. It should have been cleaned 3 days ago. How did it happen? A pause fell. She looked at him over her shoulder. He met her gaze and said nothing more. The particular set of his jaw told her everything the silence didn't. She cleaned the wound anyway and stitched the small split at the corner and did not press him on the origin of the injury. She had worked in a charity ward long enough to know the difference between a man who hadn't fallen and a man who wasn't ready to say so. I'm going to need you to come back in 3 days, she said. I want to check for infection. Yes, miss. She finished tying off the suture and sat back. He watched her with the careful, dark eyes of someone taking an assessment. Word of advice, miss, he said quietly. You want to be careful here. Mrs. Crane, she don't like this. Having a woman nurse treating men. He paused. She's already been to see the doctor this morning. I know Dr. Reeves said from the other side of the curtain loudly enough to make clear he had been listening. And I told her that her opinion is welcome to go directly to the bottom of the Rio Grande. Hector almost smiled. She's got power in this town. Then she can use it to find another doctor, Violet said pleasantly, and leave me to treat the patients who actually need treating. He studied her for another moment. Then with the deliberate slowness of a man reconsidering something, you got spine, I've been told. Good. He stood. You're going to need it. He left. Dr. Reeves came through the curtain with the expression of a man who had been waiting for years for a specific conversation. Welcome to Red Rock Flats, Miss Mercer, he said. I think you're going to be exactly what this town needs. Or a great deal of trouble, she said. In my experience, he said cheerfully, those are usually the same thing. The door opened. It happened while Reeves was showing her the medicine cabinet, a burst of motion and expensive fabric, a woman in her 50s with ice-colored eyes, in the bearing of someone who had decided a long time ago that the world was obligated to arrange itself around her preferences. Dorothea Crane. She did not look at Reeves. She looked at Violet with a particular quality of attention that felt like being weighed and found both wanting and threatening simultaneously. So this is her, she said. Mrs. Crane. Reeves's voice was courteous and entirely without deference. What a surprise. Don't flatter me, Elias. She circled Violet with the slow measured movement of someone conducting a formal inspection. Young, unmarried, pretty. She said the last word the way one might identify a flaw in a piece of livestock. And you expect her to treat the men of this town, to be alone with them in an examination room. I expect her to provide medical care, Reeves said, which is her profession, which is in fact why I hired her. Florence Nightingale herself, Violet began. Don't lecture me about that English spinster. Dorothea's eyes fixed on her with something that was almost respect for the audacity and entirely not. I know exactly what you are, Miss Mercer. You come from back east with your modern ideas and your medicine bag, thinking you can simply walk into a community and ignore how things are done here. How things are done here, Violet said, keeping her voice quiet and level, leaves men dying of injuries that could be treated. I came to fix that. Nothing else. Dorothea was very still for a moment. My husband's company employs the majority of the men in this town, she said. You would do well to remember that. And those men, Violet said, deserve medical care. That's why I'm here. The silence was the kind that had weight. Then Dorothea smiled, and it was the coldest expression Violet had seen since her mother-in-law's face at Thomas's graveside. "We'll see how long you last, Miss Mercer. This town has ways of making outsiders understand where they don't belong." She left. The door swung shut. Reeves let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "you've made an enemy." "I noticed. Margaret Dorothea, rather, is the most powerful woman in this territory. Her husband owns the mine. She considers herself the authority on every social matter within 20 miles. She's not wrong about the power," Violet said. She rolled her sleeves back down. Her hands were perfectly steady. "But she's wrong about me." Reeves looked at her for a long moment, then quietly, with something in his voice that sounded like relief, "Yes," he said, "I believe she is." That night, in the small room above the clinic narrow-bed washstand window overlooking the main street of a town she had been in for 6 hours, Violet sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to Red Rock Flats settle into its night sounds. Dorothea Crane's words moved through her memory. This town has ways of making outsiders understand where they don't belong. She had heard those words before. Different voice, same architecture. Her mother-in-law standing in the parlor of the house where Thomas had grown up. "You never belonged here. You never will. This family does not claim you." Violet looked at her hands in the lamplight, the hands that had cleaned Hector's wound and stitched his lip and written out a care schedule in small, neat script. The hands that had wrapped Tomas's wrist that morning found the specific tension in the scar tissue and countered it. These were not the hands of a woman who did not belong somewhere. These were the hands of a woman who had work to do. She blew out the lamp and lay down on the narrow bed and thought of Elias Calloway's face, as he had said you might, in answer to her wondering about knowing a place. The simple certainty of it, as if it were not a question at all. She thought about the guest room at Iron Hollow, the way the morning light had come through the curtains in long, pale bars. She thought about the well, the old wooden trough where she had fallen. The signs she had been able to read finally as Elias carried her bags to the clinic Iron Hollow Ranch established. 1841. 40 years of water and cattle and weather and work. 40 years of belonging to a piece of the earth. She fell asleep thinking about it, and she did not dream, and in the morning she was ready. The first 2 weeks in Red Rock Flats were an education in the particular architecture of a small town's suspicions. Patients came to the clinic, but not as many as Dr. Reeves had predicted. Word had spread, as Hector had warned it would, about Dorothea Crane's disapproval of the new nurse. In a town where the Crane Mining Company employed most of the working population, Dorothea's opinion carried the weight of economics. People who might have sought treatment for manageable injuries chose to wait instead to see which way the wind was blowing before they committed to being seen walking through Violet Mercer's door. "They'll come around," Dr. Reeves said with the cheerful certainty of a man who had been saying that about Red Rock Flats for 30 years and had been right often enough to keep saying it. When Violet asked, "When they need you badly enough that they don't have the luxury of caution." In the meantime, she organized. She spent 3 days cataloging Reeves's medicine cabinet, which had the anarchic quality of a collection assembled by someone brilliant who had never had a system, and created a logical organization by category and frequency of use. She cleaned and sterilized the examination area with the thoroughness she had learned in the charity ward, where infection traveled fast and the patients who died of septic wound complications were the hardest to look at afterward because they had survived the original injury, and it was the carelessness of care that killed them. She made house calls. Reeves sent her to the patients who already trusted him and were willing tentatively to extend that trust 1 degree outward to the woman he had brought in. An elderly farmer with gout. A mother with 3 children, all presenting with the same summer cough. A man at the edge of town who had been living with a broken rib for 3 weeks because he couldn't afford to miss work to come in. She treated them. She was careful and thorough and did not waste their time or their dignity. She did not charge the ones who couldn't pay, and she noted their accounts in her records with the same precision she brought to everything because they deserved the same record-keeping as anyone else. Slowly, carefully, the town began to watch her. She saw Elias twice in those 2 weeks. The first time he came to the clinic with a ranch hand who had caught his arm on barbed wire, a long, clean laceration that needed to be properly closed. The edges brought together neatly, or there would be a scarring that would limit the man's range of motion. Elias stood in the corner of the examination room with his hat in his hands and his eyes following every move she made with a focus that would have been unnerving if it hadn't felt more like assessment than intrusion. "Where did you learn that suturing technique?" he asked when she was halfway through. "Charleston City Hospital, charity ward. We had a surgeon who believed that a nurse who couldn't suture was a nurse doing half a job. She tied off the stitch." He was right. "He taught you or you watched both?" "Then I practiced on pork rind for 3 months until he trusted me on a patient." Something shifted in his expression, something that was not quite admiration and not quite amusement, but had elements of both. "Pork rind. It has similar resistance to human skin. It's a standard technique." She moved to the next section of the wound. "How is Tomas's wrist better?" "He told me to tell you the morning wrapping is working." "Good. He should continue it for another 2 weeks and then come back so I can reassess." "I'll tell him." She finished the suturing and dressed the wound and gave the ranch hand his instructions. When she turned around, Elias was still there. He had put his hat back on. "How are you finding it?" he asked. "The work is good." She didn't have to think about it. "There's more to do than I can do in a day, which is the right kind of problem to have. And the rest of it?" She understood what he meant. The town, the watching, the crane situation hovering at the edge of everything. "I'll manage," she said. He nodded the short, certain nod she was beginning to associate with him, specifically the gesture of a man who believed her. Not because she had persuaded him, not because she had performed capability, but because he had made his own assessment and arrived at his own conclusion. It was unexpectedly steadying. He paid for the treatment before she could protest the offer, which happened quickly enough that she didn't get the opportunity to protest at all. "Reeves can use the money," he said, "and so can you. Don't argue about it." I wasn't going to argue. You were thinking about it. She was not going to admit that was true. He left. She stood in the empty examination area for a moment, aware of the specific quality of quiet that follows a particular kind of presence, and then went back to work. The second time he saved her from something. She had gone to the general store for supplies, carbolic acid, clean cloth, a particular brand of willow bark preparation that Reeves used for fever cases. She was examining a supply list when the shadow fell over her, tall, with a specific quality of deliberate invasion, the kind of space-taking that is a communication rather than an accident. "Miss Mercer," she turned. The man was perhaps 35, lean in the manner of a coiled thing, with an easy smile that she read instantly as the smile of someone who used it the way other people used hands, as a tool for gripping. Two men behind him, all three positioned to make her feel the smallness of the space around her. "I'm Cole Danton," he said, "foreman at the Crane mine." The smile widened. "Mrs. Crane asked me to pass along a message." I'm sure she could have delivered it herself. She could have. He stepped closer, not much, just enough to make the geography uncomfortable. "She wanted me to explain something that might be hard to hear from a woman. This town has a way it works. Has worked for years. You coming in here and Mr. Danton?" She kept her voice level. "I'm here to buy medical supplies. Whatever message you're carrying can wait until I finish shopping, and then I'll tell you that I'm not interested in hearing it." His eyes cooled. The smile stayed, but it was doing different work now. A woman alone out here doesn't have a lot of options when the community decides not to cooperate with her. Not quite a threat. Not quite, not one. Mrs. Crane wants you to understand that. She does understand it. Elias's voice came from her left, from nowhere, from everywhere, the particular spatial confidence of a man who had just been leaning against the counter 3 feet away and was now standing between Violet and Cole Danton as if he had always been there. "Mallister." Danton's smile went entirely away. "Jake." Elias's tone was flat and entirely without aggression, which somehow made it worse. "I think she asked you to leave her to her shopping." "This ain't your business. The lady told you what is and isn't her business. I'm just agreeing with her." He did not move, did not shift his weight, did not do anything that could be called a threat. He simply remained. "How's your family, Jake? Your sister doing all right? The one whose husband works shaft 4. Something moved through Danton's expression. Quick and complicated. "We're done here," he said. He left. The two men with him left. Violet did not allow herself to show any of what was moving through her until she heard the door close. Then she let out a breath that had taken some effort to hold. You didn't have to know. Elias picked up her list from where it had fallen off the counter. But I was here. He handed it to her. Jake Danton is complicated. He does Crane's work because he needs to. He's not a good man, but he's not a completely bad one either. The line moves depending on the day. A pause. Don't be alone on the street at night for a while. I can't hide in the clinic. I didn't say hide, I said don't be alone. He met her eyes. There's a difference. She held his gaze for a moment, trying to read what was in it. Why she said. He seemed to consider how to answer that. I know enough, he said finally, which was the same answer he had given her in the guest room that first morning when she had asked why he sat outside her door for 4 hours. They walked back to the clinic together, and the hostile stares they passed fell back from whatever it was they saw in Elias Calloway that made recalculations seem like the sensible choice. At the door, he stopped. Saturday, he said, come to the ranch for supper. Carmen's been asking about you. Carmen or you? The question surprised him. She could tell by the brief stillness before he answered. Both, he said. And there was something in his voice on that word, not admission exactly, but the particular quality of honesty that comes when a man says less than he means because more is still too exposed. Saturday, she said. He nodded and left. Saturday arrived with a sky the color of copper and the particular smell that she had learned in 2 weeks meant weather. Storm-coming Reeves said that morning, squinting at the horizon with the sky-reading competence of a man who had spent 30 years at the mercy of New Mexico Territory's weather. Monsoon? Might be evening, might be sooner. She had thought about canceling. She had thought about it twice and dismissed it twice on the grounds that canceling because she was nervous was the kind of capitulation that started small and ended in a life lived at whatever distance felt safest. She was not going to live at whatever distance felt safest. She had tried that. The distance didn't work. Elias arrived at the clinic at 4 in the afternoon as promised with the wagon already hitched and an expression that said the state of the sky was a fact he had already accounted for. Storm's coming fast, he said. We should move. Is it going to catch us? He looked at the sky with the focused, impersonal attention of someone reading a text. Maybe, if it does, there's a line shack halfway between here and the ranch. We can shelter there. She climbed into the wagon. The first hour of the drive was fine, the sky dramatic but distant, the air heavy with a particular electric quality that preceded rain. Elias drove and did not force conversation, and she sat beside him, watching the clouds build in the south with the stacked, deliberate slowness of something very large gathering itself. They were halfway to Iron Hollow when the sky opened. It did not rain. It fell water in quantities that seemed designed to demonstrate the inadequacy of the word rain. She could barely see the horses in front of them. Lightning cracked close enough to feel in her teeth, and both horses lunged sideways and then were held by Elias's hands on the reins, steady and relentless, pulling them back to the road. Shack is a quarter-mile, he shouted over the roar of it. She gripped the seat with both hands and did not speak. The shack appeared through the curtain of water like something dreamed rather than built. Small gray weathered to the bone, with a low lean-to attachment where Elias brought the horses under cover. He was out of the wagon before it fully stopped unhitching and securing the team with the focused efficiency of someone doing a rehearsed thing, and then he was at her side helping her down, his hand at her elbow, and they ran the 10 feet to the shack's door with rain coming down hard enough to soak through everything in seconds. Inside, dark, smell of dust and old hay, and the particular dry cold of an enclosed space. Something small moved in a corner and was still. Elias struck a match, lantern on a shelf half full of oil. He lit it. The shack was a single room, a cot with a folded blanket, a small iron stove, a shelf with a few cans and some basic tools, a chest against the wall. They were both completely soaked. There are blankets in the chest, he said, moving to the stove. And there should be a spare shirt. Ranch. Hands leave things here. He did not look at her. You should get out of the wet clothes. I'll keep my back turned. I'm a nurse, she said, which was the thing she always said when people treated her body as something that required careful navigation. But she opened the chest anyway. The blanket was rough wool, clean. The shirt, clearly his, one of the work shirts he probably kept here for long days on the range, was worn soft with washing large enough to serve as a dress. She hesitated for only a moment before practicality won over whatever else it was competing with. She changed quickly. When she turned her around, he was crouched at the stove with his back to her, coaxing a small fire from the flint. All right, she said. He straightened and turned, and when he saw her wearing his shirt, there was a moment, a brief, specific, very quiet moment, in which his expression did something she had not seen it do before. Not dramatically, just a slight opening like a door. He said nothing. He looked away and finished with the stove. "How long will it last?" she asked. "Could be an hour. Could be the night. These build fast and move slow." He pulled a second blanket from the chest and brought it to the cot, set it down, and then sat on the cot's far end himself, deliberately positioned, leaving the most space possible. She sat on the other end, wrapped in the wool blanket, listening to the rain come down on the thin roof like something insistent. "Tell me about the water rights," she said. He looked at her. "Hector mentioned it," she said. "The mine wanting to buy something from you. I've heard pieces of it from the patients." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking out of curiosity. I'm asking because things have been—" She paused. "You've been carrying something since I arrived. I'd rather know what it is." The silence lasted long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he told her. All of it his grandfather's well. The 40-year history of the water rights crane's systematic acquisition of subsurface water across the territory, the lawyers who had declined to help the telegram with its polished threat. He told it without drama or self-pity, in the flat methodical voice of someone reporting facts, and she listened without interrupting. When he finished, she thought for a moment. "The title documentation," she said. "Where is it in the safe at the ranch? Then Crane can't claim you don't have it. Whatever he does legally, he's going to have to fight documented 40-year ownership." She turned toward him slightly. "Have you tried writing directly to the territorial governor?" "The governor is in Santa Fe. Crane has influence in Santa Fe. He has money in Santa Fe," she said. "Those aren't always the same thing. Influence is social. Money is contractual. Courts care about contracts." A pause. "I know someone. Back in Charleston, my husband's brother, who I have not spoken to since the funeral. He's a lawyer. Not criminal, but property. He might know someone out here who isn't in Crane's pocket." Elias looked at her. Something complicated moved through his expression. "You'd reach out to your husband's family," he said. "For this, I'd reach out to someone who might be useful." She held his gaze. "That's different." The fire had taken hold in the stove and warmth was beginning to move through the small space. Outside, the rain came down in sheets, the lightning further away now, the thunder rolling rather than cracking. "Tell me about Genevieve," she said. She had not planned to say it, but it came out quiet and direct, and she did not regret it. Elias went very still. "Carmen," he said, not quite a question. "She showed me a photograph. She thought I should know." Violet watched him. "You don't have to." 8 years ago," he said. His voice was level in the way of a man who had spent 8 years making his voice level about this. "She was the daughter of a man in Albuquerque. We met when I went to sell cattle. We wrote letters for a year, and then she came out here to see the ranch." He was quiet for a moment. "She said she thought she could live here. She said she loved me." Another pause longer. "After 6 months, she said she couldn't. Said the loneliness of it was different than she expected. That she needed to be somewhere with people and culture and things this place doesn't have. She left. She left." He said it simply. "I didn't try to stop her. She was right. This isn't a life that suits everyone." But after he stopped, after I decided I was not going to do that again, put myself in that position, care about someone who was going to leave. She understood then why he had said, "You might," with such specific weight, because he had meant it as both something he was saying to her and something he was saying to himself. A possibility he was fighting with everything in him. "I know about leaving," she said quietly. He looked at her. "My husband died." She said it simply. "Typhoid. I was his nurse for 6 weeks before I was his wife, and when he got sick, I was his nurse for 3 weeks more while he died. And his family blamed me for it, for not saving him from marrying him in the first place, for existing." She looked at her hands in the lamplight. "I left Charleston at midnight on a Tuesday because if I stayed one more day, I was going to stop being a person and become just the woman who killed Thomas Mercer." He listened with the particular quality of attention she had noticed in him, from the first morning, not waiting for her to finish so he could respond, but actually hearing the words. "She's wrong," he said. "His family, you know that. Some days." She looked up. "Some days I know that. Other days it's harder." The fire crackled. The rain moved from roaring to a steady, heavy sound persistent and surrounding. There's something else, she said. She had not planned this either, but there was something about the small space and the dark outside and the warmth of the fire and the quality of his attention that made it possible to say things she had not said to anyone. For he died a month before, maybe 6 weeks before he got sick. She kept her voice steady. I lost a baby, very early. It wasn't. She stopped and started again. I never told Thomas. He was already not well in other ways and I couldn't add to it. And then he got sick, and then he died. And I never told anyone at all. The silence after this was not empty. It had a weight to it, the specific weight of something finally set down after very long carrying. Elias did not offer condolences. He did not say he was sorry in the reflexive way that deflects rather than receives. He simply sat there and let the thing she had said exist in the air between them, real and unperformed, without rushing to make it smaller. After a long moment, he said, You've been carrying that alone. Yes, that's too much, he said. Not judgment, just fact. The way he stated things. Yes, she said, and her voice cracked on the word just slightly, the hairline fracture of something held for too long under too much pressure. He reached across the space between them and put his hand over hers. That was all. His hand over hers, be warm and rough and certain. She did not cry. She was done with crying alone, and this, whatever this was not alone. They sat like that while the storm moved over them. Outside, the water came down and the desert drank it the way the desert always drank, whatever it was given completely, without reservation, leaving no evidence in the morning that it had ever been thirsty. Later, much later, when the fire had burned low and the rain had settled into a steady background sound, they talked about other things, easier things. The ranch's history told in pieces. Her childhood on the Carolina coast, which felt like a story from another person's life. The patients she was beginning to know in Red Rock Flats. The ones she was worried about and the ones who surprised her. At some point, she said, Do you ever think about what your grandfather was like? Sometimes. He was quiet for a moment. I know the facts of him, what records say what my father told me. He came out here with $40 and a mule, and a belief that the land would give back what you put into it. A pause. I think about whether he was right about that. Was he? The land gives back. Not always what you put in, not always in the form you expected. He looked at her across the small space. Sometimes it gives you things you didn't know you needed. She held his gaze and felt the heat from the stove and the warmth of his hand, which was still over hers, and thought about 40 years of water under the ground and the specific improbability of being here, in this small gray room, with this particular man after everything that had brought her to this moment. I'm glad I came to Arizona, she said. New Mexico. The correction came with a small, embarrassed laugh. I keep doing that. It's all right, he said. Most people can't tell the difference from back east. I should know better. I'm living here, you are, he said. And it sounded the way he said it less like an observation and more like a fact he was deciding to believe in. She didn't kiss him. That was not what this night was. This night was something quieter and more foundational, a laying down of what was true, a learning of what the other person had been carrying, and saying, I see it. I won't look away. She fell asleep against his shoulder sometime before midnight and did not know it happened and did not apologize for it when she woke in the gray light of 4 a.m. to find the fire down to embers and the rain stopped in the desert outside the small window silver with pre-dawn. He was awake. He had not moved. She straightened, aware of warmth in its absence. I'm sorry. Don't be. They drove back to Red Rock Flats in the early morning with the desert washed and steaming in the first light. Everything new and raw and different smelling, the way the world always smells after a storm has moved through it. They did not speak about what had happened in the shack. They didn't need to. Some things don't need to be categorized to be real. I want to court you properly, he said as they came in sight of the town. She looked at him. Dinner at Thompson's, Sunday mornings at the church. The whole thing. His jaw was set in a way she had learned to recognize not stubbornness, but resolution, a decision made, and not open to argument. This town is watching everything you do. The mine rescue shifted things in your favor, and I am not going to be the reason they shift back. You're not, I'm a complication, he said. I know that. And you've worked too hard here for me to make you a scandal. He met her eyes. So we do this right. She wanted to tell him that she didn't care about any of it, the town, the scandal, the careful navigation of other people's opinions. She had stopped caring what people thought of her approximately 11 months and 14 days ago. But she recognized in his insistence on doing this right something that was not about the town at all. It was about her work and what she was building, and his refusal to be the thing that made that harder. All right, she said. She watched him drive away afterward and stood on the boardwalk outside the clinic, with the morning light coming down clean and sharp, and everything feeling changed in the particular way that things feel changed when you have stopped being afraid of the change. He came back, said Dr. Reeves from behind her. He was standing in the clinic doorway with a cup of coffee, looking like a man who had been awake for hours and was very satisfied with himself. Through a monsoon for a supper invitation. In my experience, Miss Mercer, that is a man who is, don't she said, I was only going to say interested, Reeves said with enormous dignity. You were going to say more than that. I was going to say considerably more than that, he agreed and went back inside. 3 weeks after her arrival, the mine collapsed. She was in the middle of a routine house call, a child with a persistent ear infection who had been brought in by a mother who apologized 3 times for taking her time when the sound reached her. Not the collapse itself, which happened underground and was in some ways silent, but the aftermath, a deep resonant crack that seemed to come from the earth itself, followed by a cloud of gray-brown dust rising over the eastern edge of town where the mineworks stood. She knew what it was before she could think it. She was running before she knew she had made the decision. The scene at the mine entrance was chaos with a specific kind of center to it, women in tight, silent groups because crying could come later, but right now they needed to hear something useful. Men shouting because shouting gave the helplessness somewhere to go. Arthur Crane standing apart from both groups with the expression of a man calculating figures. His face, she noted, showed no distress, just arithmetic. How many, she asked the first person she reached. 19 in shaft 4, a man said. His hands were shaking. They were setting charges for the new tunnel. Something went wrong, or something went right, said a voice at her elbow. She turned. Hector was there, Hector, who she had stitched 3 weeks ago, who had told her she had spine. His face was closed and white, and there was something in his eyes beyond ordinary fear. For somebody, she did not have time to ask what he meant. I'll go in, she said to no one in particular, to the general necessity of the situation. That is absolutely out of the question. Dorothea Crane's voice cut across the crowd like a blade. That woman is not going into the mine. Then who? Violet turned. Dr. Reeves was there, pale at the edge of the crowd, his hand pressed to his chest, in the way he had when the altitude affected his heart. Dr. Reeves is 71 years old. If that tunnel is unstable and it shifts again, I'll manage, Reeves began. You won't, she said gently but without room for argument. She looked at him directly. You know you won't. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, with the grace of a man who had spent a lifetime putting the patient's well-being ahead of his own ego, my bag is in the clinic. Take it. I have mine. She turned and went. Miss Mercer. Dorothea's voice behind her carried the specific edge of a last warning. Sue me for impropriety later. Mrs. Crane, she said over her shoulder, and did not look back. The shaft was everything she had expected and worse. Dark except for the lanterns the rescue workers carried, moving points of light in the underground black, the kind of darkness that has physical weight. The air thick with dust and the particular metallic smell of disturbed earth, and underneath that, something sharper, the chemical tang of spent explosive. The tunnel groaned at irregular intervals, the sound of massive, unsettled weight finding its new geometry. Here, a voice from ahead. She moved toward it. The next 4 hours happened in the way that emergencies always happen in her experience, not as a single experience, but as a rapid succession of separate moments, each requiring its full attention and then immediately giving way to the next. A man with a crushed leg pinned by a beam, she could not move without help. She stabilized what she could stabilize and marked him for extraction and moved to the next. A younger man with a head wound that bled in the terrifying way head wounds did but was on examination surface rather than structural. She dressed it and told him to stay still and moved to the next. A third man, a fourth. You're the nurse, said the young man with the leg, Mateo. he told her, 19 3 weeks on the job. His voice was flat with the careful flatness of someone managing pain they had decided not to feel yet. The one Mrs. Crane hates. That's me. Guess she was wrong about some things. Sit still and keep pressure on that, she said. She worked by lantern light and feel in the accumulated knowledge of years that had been built from nothing, from watching and practicing and failing small so she wouldn't fail large when it mattered. She did not think about the groaning overhead. She did not think about the last time the tunnel had shifted 20 minutes ago enough to send everyone without injured patients scrambling toward the entrance. She did not think about anything except the person in front of her and what they needed. Hector found her in the fourth hour. He was not injured. He had been in a different part of the shaft when the collapse happened and had gotten out early. He had gone back in, she understood, to look for the others. And now he was crouched beside her while she worked, his voice very low beneath the noise of the rescue operation. I need to tell you something. Not now, now. His voice had the particular quality of a decision being made. Because once we're out of here, it's going to be easier for me to not say it, and I've been not saying it for a long time. She kept working. Then say it. This tunnel didn't collapse by accident. She stopped, looked at him. The charges that went off, they weren't the ones being set for the new section. His voice was steady with the steadiness of someone who had been living with a truth that took effort to carry. Those were old charges, ones that were pulled months ago and were supposed to be disposed of. They were put back. Somebody put them back, wired them to the new detonator circuit, and set them to go when the shift crew was in the deepest section. A pause, the section that wouldn't be covered by the standard explosion insurance clause. The one that Arthur Crane needs to drill to get to the northern water table he's been trying to access for 2 years. She processed this. He blew the tunnel, she said. Not a question. I can't prove it. I'm a miner, not a lawyer. He looked at her with those careful dark eyes. But I know what I saw when they set the charges yesterday morning. And I know where those old charges were supposed to be. Another pause. 3 men are dead in there, Miss Mercer. Not by accident, the tunnel groaned. Tell me later, she said. When we're out, she went back to work. You can't say anything yet, he said. If Crane knows I told someone, I understand. She did. Later. Outside. When these people are safe. He nodded once and helped her move to the next injured man. So, 16 of the 19 were alive when the last of them was brought out. 3 had not survived the initial collapse found deep in the shaft by the rescue workers, gone before anyone could reach them. 3 men. She noted their faces and their names when the other miners told her and committed them to memory the way she committed all her patients to memory, because they deserved that. She came out of the tunnel into afternoon sunlight that seemed almost aggressive after the dark blinking, against the brightness covered in dust and blood that was not hers in any significant quantity. Her dress was ruined past anything that washing could address. Her hair had escaped its pins entirely somewhere in the fourth hour. She was aware of exhaustion in a theoretical way, the way you are aware of a fire burning in another room. The crowd had stayed, all of them still there in the way that communities do sometimes stand and wait for something to resolve itself, because dispersing would feel like abandonment. Elias was at the front of it. She saw him first, his face, which had the particular tightness of someone who has been afraid for a long time and has been very controlled about it. And then the tightness shifting when he saw her into something that made her throat close. She walked toward him. Her legs were doing the thing they did at the end of very long shifts, when the adrenaline had finished its work and the body began the accounting. I'm all right, she said before he could ask. You're covered in not mine. She reached him. Mostly. He put his hands on her shoulders, both hands solid and certain, and looked at her the way he had when he found her by the water trough, with the particular intensity of a man verifying that someone is real. 16, she said. 16 alive. Doc Whitmore. He stopped, started again. Reeves, he's been telling everyone in earshot. His voice had the rough texture of something he was managing. Come here. She let him pull her in, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the solidness of him, the warmth, the specific reality of a person who was worried about you and had been for 4 hours and was trying to manage the relief. The wagon's here, he said. Carmen has everything ready. You're coming to the ranch. I should stay. Reeves is handling it. His tone had the familiar brook no argument quality that she had spent 3 weeks deciding whether to find irritating or reassuring. For once in your life, let someone take care of you. She looked up at him. His face was still tight with the residue of fear, and there was something else in it, something she had been seeing for weeks and had been careful about naming. All right, she said. She let him help her into the wagon. She let him wrap a blanket around her shoulders. She watched the mine works recede behind them as they drove, the dust still hanging in the air over the entrance, and thought about what Hector had told her in the dark and what it meant for everyone. Somewhere on the road to Iron Hollow, she fell asleep against Elias Calloway's shoulder. He did not wake her. The ranch house was quiet and lit with warm light when they arrived, Carmen appearing at the door before the wagon had fully stopped, taking in the situation with one comprehensive look and transforming it into action. A hot bath, clean clothes, food. Elias sat in the front room while she bathed and changed, and when she came downstairs, he was standing by the fireplace with 2 cups of coffee, the same way he had stood the first night she stayed here, the night she had woken up and found him there, and had not been able to say what it meant to her that someone was waiting. "Thank you," she said, "for coming. Couldn't leave you there." "You could have." She took the coffee. "Most people would have." His eyes met hers across the firelight. "I'm not most people." "No," she said, "you're not." The fire moved between them, light and shadow, and she thought, this is what it feels like to be in the right place. Not safe exactly, not resolved, but aligned. The way a compass needle aligns when the thing it is seeking is close. "I need to tell you something," she said. And she told him about Hector, about the charges, the old detonator circuit, the 3 dead men, and Arthur Crane's water table ambitions. She told him cleanly and completely, the way she told him everything, without embellishment and without minimization. When she finished, he was very still. "You're sure Hector is credible? He had nothing to gain by telling me and something real to lose." She met his gaze. He was afraid, not of being wrong, of being believed. Elias set down his coffee cup. He walked to the window and looked out at the night, and she watched his profile in the lamplight and saw him making the decision she had seen him make before, the decision to take the thing that was difficult and not look away from it. "Crane blew his own tunnel," he said, "killed his own men for the water table and the insurance." He was quiet for a long time. "I've been fighting him for the water above ground," he said finally. "I didn't know he was already moving for what's below." A long exhale. "If he gets the underground access he wants, it's not just the ranch," she said. "It's every well in this valley, every farm, every family." He turned. His face in the lamplight was something she was learning, the particular geography of it, the way his expressions lived there quietly without announcing themselves, the way you had to know where to look. "I'm going to need that lawyer," he said. "I'll write tomorrow," she said. And that was the decision, and not spoken, as a promise, not formalized, just acknowledged between them as the next thing that had to be done, and the fact that they were going to do it together. Carmen appeared in the doorway. Her face held the expression of a woman who had been watching 2 people not quite say something for several weeks and had opinions about the pace. "The guest room is ready," she said. "You're staying." It was not a question. Violet looked at Elias. "She's right," he said. "She usually is." The days after the mine collapse moved differently. Not faster, not slower, but with a changed weight, the way the air changes after lightning, carrying both the aftermath of the strike and the awareness that the sky is still capable of it. Violet stayed 2 nights at Iron Hollow. She told herself it was practical. She was exhausted from the mine. The roads were still difficult from the monsoon. Reeves had the clinic covered. All of those things were true. But she also stayed because the ranch had a quality she had forgotten was possible. A steadiness beneath the surface of things, a sense of continuity that she could feel in the worn smoothness of the kitchen table and the particular creak of the 3rd porch step and the way Carmen moved through the house as if it had been built around her. She stayed because being here felt like breathing after a long time of shallow air. On the morning of the 2nd night, she wrote the letter to Thomas's brother, William Mercer, whom she had not spoken to since the funeral, who had stood in the churchyard with his mother's face and chosen his mother rather than the truth. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not offer it. She wrote plainly, "I need an introduction to a property lawyer in New Mexico territory who cannot be purchased by the Crane Mining Company. A man died in that collapse. 3 men died. I believe it was not an accident. The water rights to Iron Hollow Ranch are at the center of it. If you know anyone who can help, I need that name. She gave the letter to Carmen to post. Elias watched her across the breakfast table. He did not ask what she was writing. When she set the pen down, he refilled her coffee without being asked. You don't have to do this, he said. I know. The water rights are my problem. People died, she said. That stopped being just your problem. She looked at him directly. And I have a particular feeling about people dying when something could have been done. He was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, as if the word cost something to say, thank you, she nodded and went back to her eggs. Carmen from the doorway examined the ceiling with great interest. She returned to Red Rock Flats on the third morning, and the town that met her was different. Not dramatically. Not in any way that a person who had been there all along would necessarily notice. But she had left before the mine collapse and come back after, and the difference was in the eyes, in the way people looked at her as she walked from the wagon to the clinic, the way the woman from the general store who had previously acknowledged her existence by not acknowledging it crossed the street to thank her. The way Mateo's mother was waiting at the clinic door with a covered dish and eyes that had cried recently and were done now. My son told me what you said to him, the woman said. Down there in the dark. He said you were the calmest person he's ever seen. I've had practice, Violet said. He's going to keep his leg. He is. He'll need careful rehabilitation of the knee joint, and he shouldn't work the mine again for at least 6 months. But yes. The woman pressed the dish into her hands. You eat, she said, which was the second person in Violet's acquaintance who communicated primarily through this particular instruction. Dr. Reeves was waiting inside, looking smug in the way of a man who had predicted something and been entirely correct. 17 people came to the clinic yesterday, he said. 17. In one day. He paused for effect. I've had 17 patients in a week before. Not in a day. They were coming for you. They were asking for you, he said, without irritation and with something that was clearly the opposite of it. Several of them specifically requested that you handle their appointments. He handed her a list. These are the house calls, and these a second list, are people who came in the past 3 weeks, but were too cautious to ask specifically, and I suspect would now like to be seen by you rather than me. They just haven't said so yet. She took both lists. You're giving me your patients. I'm passing the torch, he said. There's a difference. A torch passed is still a torch. I'm not going anywhere. He gestured vaguely, resting more, doing less of the parts that hurt my back. He lowered his voice. And I'm going to write a letter to the Territorial Medical Board recommending that you be granted full nursing credentials for this region, which would allow you to practice without direct supervision. He met her eyes. You've earned it. The board will listen to me. She did not know what to say. Don't thank me, he said. Thank yourself. You're the one who went into the mine. She swallowed. Thank you anyway. Yes. He waved her off. Go treat people. That's what you're here for. 2 weeks after the collapse, Cole Danton came to the clinic. Not at a convenient time, it was early evening. Reeves had gone home, and Violet was finishing the last of the day's records by lamplight when she heard the knock. She opened the door, expecting a patient emergency, and found instead a man who looked like a man who had not been sleeping. Danton, without the 2 men behind him, without the easy smile that had been a tool without any of the apparatus of threat, was a considerably different thing. He was 40 or so, she realized, which was older than she had thought. He was holding his hat in both hands, the way people held things they needed to do something with when they didn't know what to do. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. I can see that. She stepped back from the door. Come in. He came in. He sat in the chair she indicated, which was the patient's chair, and she sat in the desk chair, and they regarded each other. You know what I was, he said. I know what you were doing, she said. I don't necessarily know why. He looked at his hat. My sister's husband works shaft 4. Ed worked. He's still alive, one of the 16. But he was there. A pause. I've been doing Crane's work for 3 years because if I stopped, Ed lost his job. And Ed has 4 children. He stopped again. That's not an excuse. No, she said gently. It's not. But it's a reason. He looked up. Whatever he had expected her to say, it wasn't that. Crane is planning to use the explosion as justification to expand the mine into the northern tunnel, he said. The one he's been denied permits for. He's going to claim the collapse compromised the structural integrity of the eastern axis, and the only safe forward is north. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is the original permit denial from the Territorial Survey Office. And this another paper is the internal survey he ordered 2 months ago showing the northern tunnel leads directly to the primary water table under Iron Hollow Ranch. He set them both on the desk. I've been sitting on these for 6 weeks trying to decide what to do with them. Violet looked at the papers. She did not touch them yet. What made you decide, she asked. Ed's oldest daughter is 8. He said it simply. She came to the mine mouth during the collapse. She stood there for 4 hours, not knowing if her father was alive. His voice was flat with effort, and I was standing next to Crane while he calculated the insurance figures. A pause. He never looked at her once. Violet picked up the papers. I need to show these to someone, she said. A lawyer we've been in contact with, one in Albuquerque. And Elias Calloway. Can I use your name? Yes. He said it without hesitation now that the decision was made, with the quality of a man who has been afraid for a long time and has decided that the fear is less tolerable than the alternative. But I'd like to not be murdered before I can testify to anything, if it's all the same. We'll make sure you're not alone with this, she said. Come back tomorrow morning. I'm going to send a message to Iron Hollow tonight. He stood, put his hat back on. Miss Mercer, he said. He stopped, started again. The things I said to you in the general store. Before, that was forgotten, she said. He looked at her for a moment, something moving through his face that was relief and shame and something else. Thank you, he said. He left. She sat in the quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote 2 words at the top, come tonight. She folded it, addressed it to Iron Hollow Ranch, and sent it with the stable boy who ran messages after hours for a penny a trip. Elias arrived before 10. He came the way he always came, without ceremony, without announcement, simply there when he was needed. She heard his horse in the street and went to the door, and he took one look at her face and came inside without asking. She spread the papers on the desk. He read them without speaking. She watched his face move through what he was reading, the careful blankness that was not actually blank, but was the expression of someone processing something large and deciding what to do about it. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. He was already surveying the underground water table, he said, 2 months ago, before the collapse. So the collapse made it easier to claim the northern tunnel was necessary for safety. She kept her voice steady and gave him the insurance payout to finance it, and Danton saw the old charges being placed. Yes, Elias leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling, then at her. The lawyer, he said. William's contact, have you heard back this morning? She reached into the desk drawer and produced a second letter, which she had been waiting to show him in person. A man named Nathaniel Price. He's in Albuquerque. He's handled 3 crane-adjacent cases and won 2 of them. She passed it across. Read it yourself. He read. A line appeared between his brows, not concern. The opposite. He says Crane has made enemies. Turns out acquiring water rights from people who need them to survive creates a certain amount of lasting resentment, Violet said. Mr. Price has contacts in the governor's office. He believes a strong enough case. She leaned forward. Elias, if Danton testifies. If we have the survey documents and the permit denial. If Price can connect it to the 2 previous cases, it becomes a pattern, he said. It becomes a criminal matter. She held his gaze. Not just water rights, negligence resulting in death at minimum. Possibly murder. The words sat between them. That's a large claim, he said. He killed 3 of his own men, she said. For water and money. That's exactly what murder is. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him thinking, not doubting her, but measuring what was possible against what was real. The way a man who had been fighting a losing battle for 2 years measured every new piece of information before he let himself believe in it. All right, he said. Write to Price. Tell him everything. Tell him we'll come to Albuquerque if he needs us there. A pause. And tell Danton I'll personally guarantee that no one from Crane's operation touches him before this is over. You can do that. I have 400 acres and 11 armed ranch hands. The ghost smiled, darker than usual with an edge to it. I can do that. She wrote the letter to Price while Elias sat across from her, and when she finished, she set down the pen and looked at him. I need to tell you something else, she said. He waited. My mother-in-law is coming here. He went very still. I got a letter this morning from William with the price introduction. He also told me that Harriet received word that I'd settled somewhere and that, she pressed her lips together for a moment. She hired someone to follow me, a private inquiry agent. He's been reporting to her since I left Charleston. She watched Elias's face. She knows I'm here. She knows I've been treating people. And William says she's coming. To do what? I don't know exactly. She looked at her hands on the desk. Harriet is not a simple woman. She is not simply cruel. She is a woman who lost her son and looked around for something to hold accountable and found me, and she has been holding me accountable with everything she has for a year and a half. A pause. She may be coming to continue that. Or she looked up. She may be coming because I am the last person who was with him, the last person who knew him at the end. And she has not been able to make herself stop needing to know what that was like. Elias looked at her steadily. Either way, he said, you're not facing it alone. She had known he would say something like that. She had known before she said it that he would. And it still moved through her with a specific warmth of something. She kept being surprised by the fact of not being alone. You're a strange man, she said. I've been told you show up. She said it simply. In my experience, people don't do that. They mean to, but they don't actually. She stopped. You show up. He met her eyes. I told you I would. I know you did. She held his gaze. I'm still learning what that means. Harriet Mercer arrived on a Wednesday. She came on the afternoon stage from Santa Fe. Violet knew the schedule now, the way you know the rhythms of a place you've decided to stay, and Violet was at the clinic when Carmen came to find her. There was a woman, Carmen said, at the hotel. She asked where you could be found. Violet set down the instrument she was sterilizing. She dried her hands. What does she look like? Like someone who has been very correct for a very long time, Carmen said, and it has cost her something. Violet walked to the hotel. Harriet was in the lobby, seated in the straight-back manner of a woman who had never quite allowed herself the luxury of poor posture. She was 60, perhaps, though she might have been younger, and sorrow had added years. She was dressed well, not lavishly, but with the specific care of a woman who considered appearance a form of control. She had Thomas's coloring, the dark hair which was now shot through with gray, the careful assessing eyes. She looked up when Violet came in. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Harriet Violet said, "You look..." The older woman stopped, started again. "You look different than the last time I saw you. I feel different." At the funeral you were Harriet paused again, in the specific way of someone who is not good at revising their own narratives and is attempting to do it anyway. "You were very still. I thought it meant you didn't. I was in shock," Violet said. "Thomas died on a Tuesday morning at 6:34. I sat with him for 3 hours before I could make my hands move to do anything. By the time of the funeral, I had been standing still for 4 days." Something moved through Harriet's face. "I didn't know that." "No." Violet came and sat in the chair across from her. "You decided what you thought it meant, and you didn't ask." The directness of this was either going to end the conversation or redirect it. She watched Harriet decide. "I was wrong," Harriet said. "It came out like something removed from a wound necessary and painful and long overdue. About what I said to you after the funeral, about what I told people, I was..." Her voice caught. "I was his mother and he was dead. And I needed it to be someone's fault." "I know," Violet said. "That doesn't I know." She held the older woman's gaze. "It doesn't make it all right, but I understand it. I understand needing something to hold on to when everything has fallen apart." A pause. "I held on to the wrong things myself for a while." Harriet looked at her hands. They were, Violet noticed, shaking very slightly, not with age, but with the particular tremor of contained feeling. "I had someone follow you," she said. "I know. That was also not all right." "No." Harriet looked up. "But the reports he sent back, I read them." She stopped again. Something was happening in her face that Violet had never seen there, a dismantling. "He told me what you were doing here. The people you were treating. The mind collapse." Her voice was careful. "He told me that when they were bringing the survivors out, one of the miners, he was barely conscious. He didn't know where he was. He said your name. He asked if the nurse was still there." A pause. The inquiry agent wrote that down. "He didn't know it would mean anything to me." Violet was quiet. "Thomas used to talk about you," Harriet said very quietly. Before I met you when you were writing letters, he would read pieces of them to me sometimes. He said, she stopped and started 3 times before she found the thread. He said he had never met anyone who saw clearly without being cold about it, who could tell the truth without making you feel small. She looked at her hands again. I was afraid of that, I think. I was afraid that he loved you better than he loved me, which is a terrible thing for a mother to. He loved you very much, Violet said. Harriet's head came up. He talked about you constantly. He was proud of you, of where he came from, of the family you built. Violet kept her voice steady because the steadiness was what was needed here. He never once said a single unkind word about you to me, even at the end. A pause. He asked for you. At the end. I want you to know that. He asked where you were. Something broke in Harriet Mercer's face. Not loudly, not with any drama, just quietly, in the way that things break and have been held together under pressure for a very long time. She wept very briefly with her hand pressed over her mouth and her back completely straight. Then she gathered herself. She reached into her bag. She produced a small wooden box which she set on the table between them. I have something, she said. Her voice was controlled again, but differently controlled, in the way of someone choosing control rather than being unable to release it. I found it when I was going through his desk after. She pushed the box toward Violet. I should have sent it a year ago. I kept it because. She paused. I don't have a good reason. I kept it because it was the last piece of him, and I was angry, and you were the one who had been there when I hadn't. Violet opened the box. Inside, her wedding ring, which she had left on the kitchen table the night she fled Charleston, because she couldn't bear to take it and couldn't bear to leave it. She had assumed it was gone, and beneath the ring a folded letter in Thomas's handwriting. She did not open it at the table. She could not. She held it in both hands and looked at his handwriting on the outside, just her name, Violet, in the careful, rounded script he had when he was being deliberate, and felt the specific, precise pain of loving someone who was gone. Not the desperate grief of the early months. Something older, truer. The ache of absence that does not stop, but becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. Thank you, she said. Harriet Mercer looked at her for a long moment. I would like to, she began, then stopped. If you're willing, if it's not. She cleared her throat. I'd like to know about the end, what the last weeks were like. I couldn't go. I told myself I couldn't, but the truth is I was afraid. Her voice was very quiet. I was afraid to watch him die, and I wasn't there, and I have to live with that. But I would like to know. Yes, Violet said. I'll tell you. They sat in the hotel lobby for 2 hours. Violet told her. Everything she could give, the weeks of nursing, the small daily details that became precious in retrospect, the things Thomas had said that she had never told anyone because they were too private to share and too important to keep entirely to herself. She told it all. Harriet listened. She did not cry again. But her face was entirely different by the end, something in it younger and something in it older, and something in it that looked like a woman who had done a necessary thing and knew it. When they finished, Harriet stood. That man, she said, inclining her head toward the window. The rancher. Elias Calloway. She said the name carefully. The inquiry agent included information about him. I expect he did. He seems to be. Harriet paused. He seems to have some feelings about your well-being. We've gotten to know each other, Violet said. Harriet looked at her. Her expression was not the cold assessment it had been at Thomas's funeral. It was more complicated than that. You deserve someone who shows up, she said at last. Thomas would have. She stopped. He would have wanted you to be happy. He knew, I think, that he was leaving you with nothing. He told me once before he got sick that you deserve someone who would stay. A pause. I thought he meant himself. I think now he may have meant something else. She picked up her bag. I'll be in Red Rock Flats for 2 more days, she said. If you're willing, I'd like to have supper with you tomorrow, to begin something different. Yes, Violet said. I'd like that. Harriet Mercer walked out of the hotel lobby with her back straight and her hands still. And Violet sat with the small wooden box in her hands and Thomas's letter folded inside it, and thought about everything that was happening and everything that had happened. In the strange, necessary way, one thing becomes possible because another thing occurred. She went home to the clinic and opened the letter alone. It was short. 1 page, dated 2 months before he got sick. My dear Vi, I've been thinking about you the way I always think about you, which is to say constantly and with a great deal of admiration. You are better than this life we've been living in Charleston. Better than the way people talk about you and the way they look past what you're actually doing. I hope when I'm gone, and I will be gone someday, we're all going someday, I hope you find somewhere that needs what you have to offer and knows what to do with it. I hope you find someone worth carrying the weight with. You never should have been carrying it alone. I'm sorry I didn't say that more while I was here to say it. I love you. I'm very proud of you. T. She folded it carefully, placed it back in the box, set the box on the shelf where she kept the few things that mattered. She sat with them for a while, then she went back to work. Nathaniel Price arrived from Albuquerque 10 days later. He was 45, compact and precise, with a briefcase that appeared to contain approximately half the documents in the territorial court system. He reviewed everything. Violet and Elias had assembled the original water rights documentation going back 40 years. Danton's testimony about the charges, the survey papers showing Crane's underground ambitions, the permit denial, and Price's own materials from the two previous cases involving Crane properties. He spread it across the table in Elias's ranch house study and was quiet for several minutes. Then, this is enough. Enough for what exactly, Elias asked. Enough for a criminal referral to the U.S. Marshals for the mine explosion. Price looked up. The charge would be criminal negligence resulting in death, which is a federal matter given the territorial jurisdiction. It's also enough to bring a civil case for the water rights violations that would be heard in a federal court rather than the territorial court, which gets it out of Judge Holt's jurisdiction, Violet said. Precisely, Price looked at her with mild approval. Once this reaches a federal level, Crane's local influence becomes considerably less useful. He'll fight it, Elias said. He will. He has resources, and he'll use them. Price began stacking papers with the systematic precision of a man who had done this before and knew what came next. But so do we. 3 families of the men who died in that collapse have already agreed to be represented. And 2 of the ranchers he previously pressured out have indicated they'd be willing to provide testimony. He paused. The pattern matters. A court that sees one water rights dispute sees a business disagreement. A court that sees 6 with documentation of deliberate manipulation in each case sees a conspiracy. Elias looked at Violet. She looked back at him. How long, he asked Price. To file 2 weeks. To resolution, Price considered. 6 months, possibly. 12. Courts move slowly. Crane will delay at every opportunity. A pause. But the filing itself, the moment it's in federal jurisdiction, changes his position here. He won't be able to intimidate local witnesses as effectively, and Arthur Crane, in my experience, loses leverage considerably when he can no longer threaten the people he's using to maintain it. And Danton, Violet asked. His safety, Mr. Danton, has agreed to give a formal deposition this week in Albuquerque, Price said. Once his testimony is on federal record, any attempt to harm him becomes evidence of consciousness of guilt. A pause. I'll be direct, it's not zero risk, but it's considerably lower risk than the current situation. Danton, who was sitting in the corner of the room in the chair of a man who had made his decision and was committed to it, nodded once. I'll do it, he said. They filed 2 weeks later. The filing traveled faster than the paperwork news always did. Within a day, half of Red Rock Flats knew that Elias Calloway and the new nurse, and Cole Danton of all people, had taken Arthur Crane to federal court. Within 2 days, Dorothea Crane appeared at the clinic. Violet had been expecting something like this. She had been preparing for it with the same deliberate calm she brought to difficult procedures. What she had not been expecting was what she found. Dorothea came in the way she had come in the first time, with authority, with presence, with the bearing of a woman who commanded rooms. But something was different. The ice in her eyes was still there, but it was cracking, not melted, but under pressure from beneath. He didn't tell me, she said. Violet set down what she was doing, what the survey was for. Dorothea continued. The Northern Tunnel, he told me it was expansion, new jobs, revenue. Her voice was flat and precise and cost considerable effort to keep that way. He didn't tell me about the charges. He didn't tell me he had people follow the survivors to make sure no one talked. A pause. I've been very useful to him for 20 years. I've done things socially that I believed were in the town's interest, that I told myself were. Mrs. Crane, I'm not here for absolution, Dorothea said sharply. I know what I've done. I know how I treated you. She met Violet's eyes. I know about the boy with the crushed hand I convinced 3 families not to bring to you. He lost more use of it because they waited. Her jaw was tight. I know that. I know you do, Violet said. I came to tell you. Dorothea stopped. Started again. I won't oppose what you're doing. With the court case, I won't use whatever influence I still have in this town to complicate it. She paused. And if testimony about Arthur's patterns of behavior, social, financial, the things I've observed as his wife would be useful, I can provide it. She said it quickly as if she needed to say it before she reconsidered. I'm not doing this for you. I want to be clear about that. I'm doing it because 3 men died and I have to look at their wives at the water pump. I understand, Violet said. Good. Dorothea stood. Her posture was still perfect. It always would be. That was something bone deep. But something had gone out of it, the rigidity of a woman performing authority. What remained was just a woman who was going to have to live with what she knew. For what it's worth, Violet said before she could stop herself. The boy with the hand, he can still do work. Modified work. I've been treating him for the past 2 weeks. He's not going to get back everything, but he's going to get back more than he thought. Dorothea looked at her. Thank you for telling me that, she said. She left. Violet stood in the empty clinic and let the quiet settle around her and thought about what it meant for people to change, not completely, not cleanly, but the fractional shifts that accumulated into something different. She thought about Harriet, about Danton, about a woman with a perfect posture walking out of a room, having chosen to hold a different kind of weight. You look like you're thinking very hard, said Dr. Reeves from the doorway. He had been increasingly present in the afternoons in defiance of his stated policy of resting more. I'm thinking about how people change, she said. Do they? Sometimes, not all the way, but enough. He came in and sat in the chair reserved for patients. Tell me how Iron Hollow is doing. Elias is managing. The filing helps. Price is good. She sat across from him. She stopped, smiled slightly in spite of herself. He came to the clinic 4 times last week. With patients, once with a patient. She looked at her hands. The other 3 times he had increasingly elaborate justifications. Reeves beamed. I see. Don't. I'm saying nothing. You're saying everything. Excellent. He folded his hands. He's a good man, Violet. Rough around the edges, but fundamentally good. The kind of person who stays. He looked at her over his spectacles. I think you know that. I know that, she said quietly. Good. He stood with the effort of an old man who was ignoring the effort. The filing has put Crane on his heels. This town is going to need its nurse for a long time. He paused at the door. And I'd like to think the nurse is going to need this town for a long time as well. She looked at him. I'd like that, she said. He nodded, satisfied, and went home. The evening before the federal court date in Albuquerque, the preliminary hearing at which Price would present the case for jurisdiction, Elias came to the clinic. He did not pretend to have a reason. He knocked, she opened the door, he came in. She had been sitting at the desk reading or trying to. The lamp was warm and the street outside was quiet, and she had been turning the same page for 20 minutes. He sat down across from her. She closed the book. Are you ready? She asked. For the hearing, he thought about it. Yes. A pause. For what comes after, however it goes, yes. She looked at him across the lamplight. There was something she had been holding for weeks, not carefully, not with great effort, but the way you hold something you want to put down and want to keep simultaneously. She had been here 3 months. She had nearly died here and treated the living and touched the grief of a town and held something important for a man who was worth holding things for. She had been learning what it felt like to be in the right place. Elias, she said. Yes, I'm not leaving. He looked at her. I want you to know that, she said. Because I know Genevieve left, and I know that you decided something after that. And I know I came from somewhere else, and I'm a nurse, and I'll sometimes be needed in the middle of the night and covered in things you'd rather not think about. And she stopped. I'm not leaving. This is where I am. This is where I'm going to stay. He was very still. That's not, he stopped. You don't have to promise that. I know the situation with Crane is uncertain, and your work here might, Elias. She said his name, The way you say the name of someone you've decided on. I know what I'm saying. He looked at her for a long time. The lamplight moved between them. Outside, the desert was doing whatever the desert did at night, enormous, impermanent, and deeply itself. I was going to ask you something, he said. I was going to wait. Until the hearing was done, until things were, he stopped. Until it was a better moment. Ask me now, Clara. He stopped, shook his head. I mean, he seemed for once in his life at a loss for language. This man who used words as carefully as he used everything, who had spent the last 3 months demonstrating that the right words at the right time were worth more than 100 unnecessary ones. You've never called me by the wrong name before, she said. No, he looked at the table. It was my grandmother's name. My father used to say, he stopped again. He used to say she was the person who made the ranch what it was, that without her, it was just land, that she was the one who made it a home. The lamp flickered. Elias, she said. Violet. He met her eyes. Will you marry me? He said it without the particular inflation of a question, not because he was certain of the answer, but because he was certain of the question, certain it was what he was asking, certain it was real. Yes, she said. The word came out immediately, the way things come out when they have been true for a long time before they are spoken. Yes. He reached across the desk. She met him halfway, his hand in hers in the lamplight. Outside the desert, inside this. They rode to Albuquerque the next morning. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Price was methodical and devastating. Crane's lawyers were expensive and unprepared for the specific depth of documentation that Danton's testimony and the survey papers provided. The federal judge, a woman in her 50s named Agnes Carroll, who had heard 3 previous Crane-adjacent cases and had opinions, ruled that jurisdiction lay with the federal court and ordered a full investigation into the mine collapse. Arthur Crane was arrested for questioning at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Dorothea Crane had left Red Rock Flats the previous week. Where she went, no one was entirely sure. She left the house and most of its contents and sent a letter to Hector's wife with 6 months of wages for the 3 men who had died and no explanation. The charges took months to resolve, as Price had predicted. But the moment jurisdiction shifted, the thing that had been pressing down on Red Rock Flats lifted not all at once, but incrementally, the way pressure releases from a wound when you remove the thing causing it. Businesses started making their own decisions about who they served. The miners organized without company interference for the first time. 3 ranchers who had sold their water rights under duress filed claims to have the contracts reviewed. Iron Hollow's water table remained exactly where it had been for 40 years. They were married in December. The ceremony was small not because they lacked community, but because neither of them wanted large. The clinic. Dr. Reeves officiating, which required him to acquire a special license that he pursued with cheerful disregard for the difficulty involved. Carmen as witness. Hector and Tomas and Abe from the ranch. Mateo recovered enough to walk on his rebuilt knee, who brought his mother and 4 siblings, a handful of patients who had quietly become something more than patients in the 3 months Violet had been working in Red Rock Flats. Harriet Mercer was there. She had come back not permanently. She would return to Charleston, but she had come back for this. She sat in the front row in the dress she had worn to Thomas's wedding and watched Violet marry a man who was entirely different from her son and entirely right for the woman Violet had become, and she did not cry and she did not look away. After she embraced Violet briefly the first time she had done so, her arms were thin and precise and held on for one specific moment before releasing. He was right about you, she said quietly. Violet did not ask which he she meant. She knew. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for letting me, Harriet said. The small medical station at the edge of Iron Hollow Ranch opened in March. Elias built it himself over the winter, with help from Abe and Tomas and whoever else could be pressed into service on the days the weather allowed. It was simple: 1 examination room, a supply cabinet, a small waiting area with 3 chairs. The sign above the door was hand-lettered by Elias himself in the careful round script of a man who did not practice his handwriting on Lizzie's station. Violet stood in front of it the morning it opened and looked at the name. Your grandmother's name was Clara, she said. Your sister was Elizabeth. Lizzie, he said. She went by Lizzie, and you named it for her girl. I told you once. He stood beside her. If there'd been someone trained nearby. Someone who knew what to do. He was quiet for a moment. This is for her, the one who didn't have anyone in time, another pause, and for anyone else out here who shouldn't have to face that alone. She looked at the sign. She thought about her mother who had died when she was 16 without a doctor because there wasn't one close enough to come in time, and about the promise she had made at that bedside that had never quite released its hold on her. She thought about Thomas and the small, lost life she had mourned alone for 2 years, and about the gift Harriet had given her, the permission to stop carrying those things as if they were debts instead of losses. She thought about the woman who had collapsed in the dirt 30 feet from a water trough 3 months ago and could not find the will to stand back up. She stood up, Violet thought. Eventually. You all right, Elias asked. She turned and looked at him. Her husband lean and certain in the morning light who showed up. Who stayed? I'm good, she said. I'm very good. He took her hand. She took his back. They walked inside. The station was ready. The door was open. And whoever needed to come could come. Thank you. Genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you for staying with Violet and Elias all the way to the end. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the person who couldn't find the will to stand back up and then found it anyway, if you've ever had to decide whether to stay in the safe distance or risk the change, leave a comment. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me which moment you'll carry. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story, because there's always another person out there who needs to hear that sometimes falling down is exactly what it takes to find the way home. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it. And come back. We'll be here. Until next time, take care of each other.